Right. Welcome to the last session of the day. Thanks for sticking it out and being here all day with us. We are back on stage with all of our panelists, and I want this to be for you, interactive, so please continue to enter your questions into the poll EV, and we will get as many audience questions answered as we can while we're up here. So when I am thinking about today, we have covered a lot of ground. We've covered the human heart from the health perspective, the human heart from the spiritual perspective. We've talked logistics of producing crops in different places. We've talked climate resiliency. We've talked hard numbers about how to account for it all. That's a lot of things to talk about in 50 minutes up here for our panel discussion. But I think, where I would like to start is circle back to where we began at the beginning, Fred, with you. One of the questions we didn't get to earlier this morning when you were up here, it's good. One of the questions we didn't get to this morning that actually came from the audience, and after listening to your presentation, I think it's a great question. So where we are today, knowing that maybe we have our own innate food wisdom, how do we wake that up? How do we get back to that?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And we do still have that innate wisdom, as livestock do too. They haven't lost it. I think it's a process for certain. And the more people are hooked on ultra-processed foods, which are ubiquitous, the worse the problem is. So I think that's the first step, is to simply, my wife and I decided years ago, it doesn't come home with us, period. Only wholesome fruits, vegetables, wholesome foods. We either source it or buy it ourselves. We just got that out because we know if we bring it home, we'll eat it. We can't resist it. It's impossible. So I think trying to make that switch first to having wholesome foods. And I visited with the lady that asked that question. It's a good one. There's nothing you have to think about. Your body knows what it needs. You don't have to when you start to overthink things, when you eat a meal, how many of you sit and think about which enzymes to release to digest the food you ate? We don't do that, right? It's the same with feedback. It's happening automatically. So I think it's trying to get wholesome foods in your diet, and then let the body guide you. And we were talking how he was asking me on the iced tea, does it have sugar in it? I said, no, it doesn't. He said, well, I'll drink it because I don't like things with you wean yourself off of all this stuff that's not so good. The only other caveat, then I'll let it go, is that with many people nowadays, and I say this through the eyes of a medical doctor that I work with who's totally on the page we are here. He works with all these sick people that are metabolically really, really sick. And so the sideboards that you put on what they can actually ingest goes down. For instance, he doesn't allow them to eat fruit because they really can't handle anything that's got fructose and glucose in it. They're insulin resistant and so forth. So their diet becomes meat and vegetables and so forth. So the balance change, but they're still operating within that wisdom of the body and which vegetables they like and so forth. So yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's so important to realize we do still have that. Then how do you express it?
Thank you for sharing that. I want to take it one step further and open it up to Fred and Drew and Aaron and Brent and Danelle and Patrick, if you have thoughts as well. When I was sitting there listening to it this morning, I'm thinking, I have 3 kids and they like to eat goldfish for dinner, and I sit here and I work in this field, and it's hard. It's a challenge, not just for yourself, but for our kids as well. For those of us who are parents and grandparents, to pass that on to them. So my question is, Fred, you talked about, getting people into their backyards and their gardens and understanding all of that. But I want to know from Drew and Aaron, how do you see the younger generation interacting on your farm, or in what ways do you think you could get them to interact on your farm?
I'm thinking.
Brent, what do you think? Your grandkids. Oh, he's not?
I think we're good, yeah. It's a struggle. I mean, one of the things that I think is the issue is they're very busy. I mean, my grandchildren are busier than my kids were, and their family is much busier than our families were. My wife and I still plant a garden every year, and it's not that we have to. I mean, we certainly can afford. We can afford the food. We used to can a lot. We don't can quite as much, but we do. And so, and we don't have a microwave in the house either, because that's a temptation. And so, I don't know. It's a tough question. Now, one of the things I feel that maybe we're turning the corner a little bit is that during the pandemic, there was a high level of interest in growing your own food. And I know in Extension in Colorado, that was a major effort for us. And we still have a very robust Master Gardener program going. It actually increased, I think, 4 or 5-fold during the pandemic. And honestly, my skeptical economist self said it's a fad. As soon as the pandemic is over, people will go back to their old habits. Well, I was proven wrong. A large majority did not go back, and they are maintaining home gardens. So I do have some hope for the future in that regard.
I guess I agree with that. I got a niece and nephew. They would get lost in the garden. I grow a big garden, collect rainwater off the barn, and they just disappear into the strawberry patch or eating tomatoes, or then you go off and you do something else and you realize they're not with you, and you have to go back and find them, and you shut them in the garden with the gate, and oops, oh well. But it's an easy way to babysit.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not always easy to take the younger generation along with you, whether it's fixing fence, checking cows, just doing the basic day-to-day things, sometimes tagging along with them, hunting and such. But those memories seem to make an impact on at least in our experience, on our niece and nephew who are not actively growing up on the operation. And every time they have a chance to come back, it has resonated with them, and hopefully there's opportunities that other youth can be involved or exposed to that. So,
Vanessa, I just want to give a shout out to some of our farm to school programs that are out there, some of our at school gardening programs that are out there. I know they're not nearly widespread enough, but man, keep supporting them, right? Show kids where food comes from, let them get their hands dirty, let them see how delicious a homegrown tomato and peas are, right?
Locally at home, there's a lot of producers that have become donating beef to the local school, and the feedback from the school has been really good. A lot better quality beef than what they're getting from the government, and so it's making a new connection there, even as kids are getting older into high school.
Great, thanks for sharing all those ideas. That's great. And Drew and Aaron, so what was it that actually made you want to go back to the farm? Was there ever any other idea? Was that always the plan?
I'll let Drew speak for himself, but I guess our parents had a rule that once we reached graduation, we had to leave. It didn't yes, it mattered what we did, where we went, but the specifics weren't as important, whether it was that we went on to college or got a job in town, but we had to leave. And leaving and seeing more of the world and learning about what else was going on out there and exploring some opportunities was important, to know what else was going on and to decide whether or not coming back and pursuing a lifestyle was what we wanted to do. And for myself, there's plenty of great opportunities out there. Some days it might be easier to participate in those opportunities than to choose to farm and ranch, but the fulfillment out of those opportunities for me was just not the same. And so that was why I chose to leave some of the comforts of those other opportunities and to come back and to contribute and try to progress what we've been doing. So
I spent 10 years working a job off the farm. Part of that time, it allowed me to work like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Part of it was 35 days on, 35 days off, all over the world. Good money, good time off, good travel opportunities, retirement, all that. But it wasn't satisfying. It was satisfying my checkbook, but it wasn't satisfying me. And it's not about the money to come back and farm and ranch. It's about what makes you happy. So.
Thanks for sharing that. Patrick, I want to ask you, working, not specifically about compost, but working in the San Luis Valley and the extreme water situation you have there, what do you really see, and to Danelle, to you too, in the area that you work in, the broad area, what are the key practices you see to really increase resilience on cropland? What are the key practices you would mention to producers?
I think the most important thing that I've learned is how a person engages the crisis that they're in, because there will be some crisis, whether it's drought or whether it's a spouse dies or whether a kid's off the rails or whatever it may be. How they're able to cope or to lean on someone else makes all the difference as to what decisions they may open up for themselves to make. And that has much more to do with probably the community they're in than themselves individually. But along with that, a person's ability to be adaptive, to see that there are ways of changing is critical. And so with the farmers and ranchers that I've worked with and talking with them over their kitchen table and finding out what is most important to them, and understanding that really well, so that sometimes we can be one for another, the check to say, we really don't want to go down that road. We really don't want to plow everything up just because it's going to be expedient. The practice in and of itself is not so much, did I use compost of this kind or that kind? I think it's much more the process of understanding, what do I want to do? What do I want to be about? And people can get to a point of understanding a way of being that's different, but it takes time, and often it's terribly uncomfortable. But those who I've seen, and myself included, when I've grown, when I've seen the people that I'm working with grow and be able to have these, some people refer to them as safe to fail experiments, where it's maybe away from the main road, or it's somewhere where they're going to know what's going on and they're going to keep tabs on it. That's critical, and I've encouraged for years everybody, it's not the Haney test, or it's not the this test or that test, or it's not the next shiny thing about soil health. It's, do you have your shovel? Do you put your shovel in your ground and you smell your soil, do you yourself know, you're not relying on the agronomist or the soil scientist to come and tell you, do you know what's cooking in your soil? Or what is their structure, are there roots? Because then we can have a deeper conversation. And I think that's maybe the most critical thing. It's not necessarily the practice, but the one practice, but it's the mindset of, I too need to be engaged with what's going on.
I love that answer. Thank you, Patrick. Danelle?
Yeah, I'm not going to match the philosophical. That was beautiful, Patrick. Thank you. I would say something similar, but with the numbers. Again, fellow ag economist here. Again, I learned from direct family experience that you can be the best animal caretaker and crop grower and still go broke in a difficult market. And you've got to know your numbers. You've got to find time somewhere to sit down with those books and start keeping those records. Know how simple or difficult they are, just start writing them down. So yeah, I don't know what the equivalent is of carrying your shovel around with you. Carry your Quicken around with you. Yeah, that's, again, it's not a sexy answer, but it comes from experience.
No, I appreciate the experience. I really appreciate the experience in the answers. I guess I'll ask the same question to Drew and Aaron. In your operation, you can answer it philosophically or, like, what practices you had a long list this morning in your PowerPoint in your presentation, about all the things that are making a difference in your operation. If you had to choose a couple, or where did you start, what would you say are the most important for the resiliency of your farm?
That's kind of difficult to answer, but for us, with our low rainfall and variable rainfall, I got really frustrated with watching the snow melt happen in the spring and losing that moisture, and then it being muddy and dealing with mud for a week, and then the rest of the year wishing you had that moisture. So I would say all the practices that influence retention and spreading of that moisture. For us, water is our #1 nutrient to feed the plants, to feed the microbiology. And yes, trees use water, but they also reduce the evaporation. It's everything you can do to hold on to that nutrient that comes out of the sky and should be a private property, right? But
Yeah, I would agree with the water, but I would also add that the livestock are a really critical tool for us, because with the retention of the water, the added forage production, we really need those livestock involved to help cycle that whole process.
I might add, we were talking about carrying a shovel around, and the question was, well, do you carry Quicken around? And I don't, but my shovel is a partial budget, and we actually have a partial budget tool on our website. And I think most producers do this intuitively. I've seen them on the back of envelopes. I've seen them on the back of napkins from the local coffee shop. But when we decided to go to strip till, for example, it was because of a partial budget. We were fortunate that we found a really good piece of used equipment, and it just so happened that as we worked through the partial budget, the decrease in the number of hours we would put on a tractor and the diesel fuel we would burn would pay for it in 1 year. I mean, that was a no-brainer. But a partial budget is what helped us to determine that. And so the only reason I would encourage you to look at the partial budget we have on our website, after saying it's intuitive, you do it anyway, is the form that we have just, I think, ensures that you capture every component. But that's, again, that's my shovel, is the partial budget. And before we make a decision, we'll pull together a partial budget. Now, got to be careful, because typically to make that work, by definition, a partial budget is one decision. It's not the 50 that I'm going to make over time. It's just like the example I gave you. We're going to buy a used strip till machine. And so we put together a partial budget, and it made sense.
Since now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of practices, the slides I didn't get to, so you have to go look at the slide deck when they become available. The 4 R's of nutrient management. If there's a spare radar diagram left, grab it and think through more careful management of our nutrients, or particularly nitrogen. It's a win-win to use it, the 4 R's, right? The right source, at the right rate, at the right time, in the right place. And it sounds so simple, and it really is. But do your radar diagram, and I think you'll see that that is a no-brainer. It's a win-win.
Between Brent and Danelle, you guys shared a whole lot of tools today, and I think the audience appreciates those and may pick and choose what they take home with them and start somewhere. But back to Drew and Aaron again, and then we'll move on a little bit with a slightly different topic. But what tools of those have you found, those financial tools, have been the most helpful to you in that process from when you started your management to today, if any of them? Maybe it's none of them, I
love that they need time. I want to consult and bounce ideas out. That's excellent collaboration.
I don't enjoy the marketing side of it. I focus more on reducing the input side of it. For me to sell calves, to sell lambs, there's a market there. I don't have control of what the sale price is at the sale barn. If I want to do direct sales and spend that time, but I don't have a lot of time. So I can easily work on my inputs. I can work on labor savings, which allows me to do other things that are going to increase my production. But it doesn't matter how much when you buy bred heifers or buy this $10,000 bull, your calf is going to be the same price at the sale barn per pound. You just don't have control on that unless you start doing direct sales. So for me, it's just looking at inputs, looking at labor savings. What can I do to increase my production with what I have? It's not a formal Excel spreadsheet. I do look at every year what my income and expenses are on cattle. And every year I don't make a huge change because I don't want to stick my neck out too far. You can make a lot of changes and get yourself into a bad bind. And you see a lot of people that go out of business that way. So
I would add that that's also part of why we both spent some time making that choice to come back to, was having watched our folks go through the 80s and trying to consider if we're gonna choose to do this, how to be strategic about it, so that if we're faced with similar circumstances, what options do we have to continue to support that choice and give us some flexibility so we're not backed into a corner. And that looked different for both of us, and it might be something that we have to, might be something that we're gonna have to do in the future, but it's good to have those backup plans too, to support. our choices.
Part of working off the farm for as long as I did was financially coming back. You were in a better place than starting off as a broke grad student with nothing and going to a banker trying to get an operating loan like our parents and getting a 18, 19% interest rate. It's financially in a position that you don't really want to be in starting off, so.
All right, thank you for sharing that. I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk a little bit more about climate science. And Fred, I want to start with you. This question is from the audience. Climate science claims livestock can be up to 30% of global emissions, and policies suggest eating less meat. What is your response to these studies, or what are we missing?
Yeah, that's a huge question, actually, one that I spend a lot of time interacting with people on, and I don't even know quite where to begin. Let's take methane just as an example. We have a paper that's just been submitted to a journal where we're looking over 30 years at methane production on this planet. And we're looking at how much of that is actually cattle responsible for that? There's not a good relationship there at all. Cattle numbers have gone down globally over the last 30 years. Methane has gone up, up, up. And a lot of that comes from inadvertent release related to the fossil fuel industry and deliberate releases of that. So that's one part.
We'll do this little bits at a time, Fred. We'll think through this together as a group. The little bit that I will add is that, again, location matters. Come back to that same point, that when you see statistics about greenhouse gas emissions from livestock, pause and look, what part of the world are they talking about? Cattle's diet influences how efficient they can be and how hard the bacteria in their rumen are having to work, and therefore how much methane they're having to produce to break that material down. And some forages are more efficient than others, and that varies dramatically around the world, depending on just what people are able to grow for livestock to eat. So I'll just add that piece, that when you see a statistic about what proportion of greenhouse gases are coming from agriculture, coming from livestock, we are all part of emitting greenhouse gases, but pause and ask first and foremost, what part of the world are you pulling that data from? The US is one of the more efficient. We do still emit methane from livestock when they burp. But it is less than that 30% global figure that often gets used, and we're working really hard in the world of research to try and find additional ways to bring it even further down through, again, diet, supplements, vaccines. We're working hard.
I guess I just mentioned it in our speech that there's a big difference in methane production off the decomposition of the manure, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic. You pile up the manure, it's going to be anaerobic, and there's going to be a lot of methane that gets produced. We used to have a whole lot more grazing and finishing by grazing back, well, probably 70 years ago. But with a lot of increase in corn acres, there's a lot more feedlots, and inadvertently that's part of it. The other side is a lot of dairies in the 70s used to have methane collectors in their barns that would collect it and heat the wash water, and it was a resource that kept their electricity bills down. But I know a couple university that have removed that from their barns because they just didn't really want to mess with it. But it's kind of interesting, or what something was once a resource is now just being released. But
So this is continuation of that question. And this is to all of you. So knowing what we know, so how is ag part of the climate solution then? Any thoughts?
First and foremost, being willing to be at the table for the conversations. I want agriculture to reclaim the word climate. It's not a 4-letter word. I know it feels like it in a lot of our communities. It's a 7-letter word, just like drought and weather and rancher and farmers. It's okay to talk about it, and being uncomfortable talking about it keeps us away from the table where the discussions are happening and where policy is being made. So, first and foremost, let's get comfortable being uncomfortable with the topic so that the ag community can be at the table and inform the discussion. We'll start there.
Something that has been painfully clear for me, watching the trajectory of the word sustainability and organic and the term regenerative. They're terms that are initially very interesting and very nebulous, and at some point they are appropriated by individuals or segments of our population or segments of the agricultural industry to be part of ourselves and say, we were always this, we've never been anything but. And I think that is ingenuous and it's not helpful. So if we're going to have a conversation and make sure that, yes, the door is open, the table's set for people to come, it can't just be the lobby that shows up and says, we're here to protect what we have, and to hell with you all, we're just spinning the dialogue. That doesn't get us anywhere, and I really worry that we're in this rut that we haven't yet got out of, where we can have real conversations about climate. And that, yes, it could be that what we do today is not the thing that we need to do tomorrow in order to make it better.
I agree, and one of the things that strikes me is it's so polarized now, right? And I make a point nowadays, for reasons I won't get into, to deliberately watch the popular media and written materials that are coming out that are promoting vegan and vegetarian diets. What are the talking points that they're using? And there's some truth to that, right? I mean, there's something, deforestation, but then it becomes so far off the charts to me with information, there's science about that. And so it can be a bit overwhelming, but trying to be informed, right? Trying to be informed enough of the arguments on both sides, and then where's the information becomes a big challenge. And then there's several of us trying to think about, well, how do you put out an alternative message? That twin study. There was a lady, Nina Teichholz, writes these unsettling science reviews, and she just did a fantastic one on the twin study. And there's a lot of agendas in all this, right? There's a lot of agendas on both sides. On both sides, there's agendas, but trying to work through that and then trying to put out alternatives, other views that the public can get their hands around, not that just eating meat is horrible for human health, it's horrible for environmental health. Well, as we're all saying, it's not that way, but how do you get that message out there is one of the things that we're thinking about a lot in ways that people will watch it, like these short little video snippets or whatever. I think it's really a huge issue to try to come to some balance. And then you get a global basis. I mean, there are nomads and pastoralists, the livestock integral part of their life, right? And it's arrogant to me to say, well, one diet fits everybody around the globe. It's a very arrogant kind of thing, I think. So that's another 2 cents worth thrown in.
More tangibly, how can agriculture be part of the solution? Again, I've already touched on the relatively low-hanging fruit, using nitrogen fertilizer more efficiently. Nitrous oxide is one of our important greenhouse gases, and nitrogen fertilizer is one of the important sources. And we know, again, from decades of research that being more mindful about the source, the rate, 4 R's, the right source, the right rate, the right time, the right place, that we can use that resource more efficiently. Do we need it? We do, right? Obviously, our crops need nutrients. We have to meet those needs. If you take them away, yields will decline, and we won't be using our land as efficiently as we should be. But using fertilizer as efficiently as we can is a huge step towards being part of the climate solution. And again, it's proven to help our bottom line, and proven to help the climate. So that's a big one in the cropping world. And again, we've already talked about in the livestock world. Cows burp. How can we help them burp less with the right, an efficient diet? And just think about trade-offs too. Again, we get into these debates about feedlots or grass-fed and which one is better. There are trade-offs. The longer a cow lives, the more it burps. The shorter it lives, the less it burps, but in getting them to finishing more quickly, there are environmental trade-offs in doing that. So, yeah, do your homework as best as you can. Acknowledge that there are trade-offs to every solution that people put forward.
Thanks. Fred, did you want to add to that?
I'll just say one more thing quickly. Peter Bick has a 4-part video series that's coming out titled Roots So Deep. Do any of you heard of that or know of that? He sent me the first and last episode, but what they did was paired ranches throughout the Midwestern part of the United States out to the east a ways. They paired ranches with what they'd call, and taking your point too, Patrick, what they would refer to as regenerative. They're really involved in working with livestock, integrating that into the system versus what he called conventional. It's very, very interesting to see, because they were looking at everything from soils and soil health through to plant diversity, through to the health of the livestock, through to emissions, and through to biodiversity of those landscapes, the number of insects and birds and so forth. And it was some amazing differences that they found, and the whole way he set that movie up. And then in the last session, to be visiting with folks that were conventional about the findings, and in very diplomatic and open ways. I remember one lady there was in tears because she said, I love birds. And they said, look at all the birds that are on these other places and insects. And it was a transformation that was taking place in some of the people that had been more conventional in terms of the way that they were looking at their landscape. It's really, it'll be out right away, and it's moving. And it was all done very scientifically for people who care about that sort of thing, where they, monitoring all this stuff, publishing it in peer-reviewed journals, and then, getting all that out there. So that's another resource that I think is quite interesting. And if it gets out more into the popular press, it can be ways to think about what ag is doing that can really make a difference in terms of the health of landscapes and every creature on it, basically.
I remember reading headlines about the COP28 meetings, and there was a segment talking about food waste. And this has been on my mind for a long, long time. We have, depending on whose study you read, anywhere from 27% to 45% of all the fresh products that are sold off the farm wind up in the United States in landfills. And when I look at that as an agronomist or a soil scientist, and I try to figure out, okay, what are the practices that are going to allow me the 5% yield increase or the 5% water use efficiency increase, because 5 or 10% is huge in agronomy terms, or in terms of potential yield or gross profit. When I think and step back and look at we're burning through in the Western United States, in my region as well, our groundwater resources. When in this year, so fall of 2023, news hit in the potato industry that Washington State increased its production 50,000 acres. 50,000 acres is the number of acres that we grow in the San Luis Valley of potatoes annually. Washington State went from 1 year to the next, 50,000 acres up. And so now nationally, the price has tanked to below cost of production, and everybody's losing money and bleeding. And they will dump, and we will dump massive amounts of those potatoes into landfills, into streams where we had no idea they were going like cattle feed instead of human food. And all of that water, all of that nitrogen, all that soil that blew away because we had to till to get ready for the potatoes, we don't know where to go to get it back. And these are the kinds of cycles that we're perpetuating, and it's a really hard starting point to get that conversation going, to say food waste is not just the individual at the refrigerator, it's us too. How do we get to that part of the conversation? Because when we oversupply, we create waste too. And when we don't have any sort of ways of regulating ourselves and how much we supply, we can cut our own throats, and we can make it so there's not generations ahead of us who can drink water.
So there's many aspects to production, food system, all of that environment, all of the interconnectedness of all of it. One of the questions from the audience, which I would like to ask all of you as producers and people who work with producers, is if you had one TikTok or one Instagram reel or one 30-second spot, what is it that you would want people who know nothing about farming, what would you want them to know? And if it's a TikTok, I think there has to be a dance or something with it, I don't know.
I remember years ago reading an article about geosmin, this compound that in a healthy soil is something that makes people happy. And it's the thing when it's starting to rain on a landscape that often those actinobacteria get awakened very quickly, and they release this geosmin into the air, and that's the smell of rain. And it's a happy compound. I'm sure there's others. And so if we can't get anywhere else, maybe we can come to our demise happily by scooping up soil that's healthy and smelling it and being more pleasant with one another.
Brent, I know you're a TikToker.
You could tell. I don't know. One of the things that strikes me, and I have nothing but admiration for those of you that are in the audience that are in food production. And as a producer myself, and especially as an extension specialist, I try never to be critical of what decisions another producer makes, because I have no idea what your conditions are. I don't know how much labor you have. I don't know what markets you have. I don't know what your balance sheet looks like. And this is an incredibly, incredibly difficult business. And I guess I would just try to impart to the non-ag public how incredibly difficult it is to raise food. And if you're in the game next year, you're a winner, because you have bested Mother Nature, you've bested markets that you don't have any control over, you've bested input prices that you don't have any control over. It is incredibly difficult to stay in this business. And my hat's off to you, and I would just hope, and I don't know how, until you're in it, you can't realize that, but I would hope they would just get some kind of an appreciation of how very difficult it is to put food on the table. It is hard, and we struggle every year, and we've got some advantages a lot of folks don't have, but it's an incredibly hard job. And I just, and I think there's a large segment of the population that understands that, but it's not easy. And of course, we, jokingly tell each other when it gets really tough and, you're kind of keeping these white back that, if it was easy, everyone would do it. Well, that works for a while, but there's times where it's hard to make that, to tell yourself that lie too. So that would be what I would, and it's probably not going to go very far, but I'd feel better.
I'd love to see that as a TikTok personally. I'll just add, Brent, that I was not brave enough and I was too risk averse to stay in production agriculture. So I went and got a job supporting that industry. So I second that point.
I would just say no matter your level of involvement, whether it's just learning and getting an appreciation for those that are involved with agriculture on a full-time basis or not, we do a lot of different practices and we get a lot of questions, and most people don't even know where to start. And it always goes back to, what are your resources? What is your unique advantage on your operation? It doesn't have to look like our practice whatsoever, but to just take a step and to start somewhere. Because once you take that first step, things start opening up, and then there's another thing that you can do differently. We've been doing bale grazing for close to probably 15 years, and we've never done it the same way twice. So I would just encourage you to take a first step, whether that's with a garden or making a connection with someone who can put beef in your freezer or wild game, or to just get more connected.
I guess with the TikTok and Instagram and all that, I would just have flashes of good scenery, the big equipment, the nice crops. And then I'd go to flashes of several years of your gross income. And then I would go to flashes of your net income. And, well, yeah, that's where we kind of end that. But I guess I do want to say something else quick. It's important being involved with some politics in agriculture. There's less and less active agriculture producers in your city, in your county commissions, in your state level. I'd encourage people to get involved with organizations like Farmers Union, Farm Bureau, Young Farmers Coalition.
Conservation
anything.
District?
Yes. Serve on boards. Get involved with anything, because with conservation districts, you vote on resolutions, that goes forward. You have lobbyists that push those things. And we don't have enough influence in our government speaking for ag. And at some point, all these organizations, whether it's Farmers Union, Farm Bureau, whoever it is, we're going to have to work together to be in this business.
Absolutely. Point well taken. Thank you, Drew. Our time is ticking down, and I can't believe it's been 50 minutes. I had multiple questions, but I think and I wanted to ask Fred to tell a story, but I don't know if we have time. Do we have time for a Fred story? Okay. And while Fred's thinking of a story to tell, after Fred tells his story, we're going to end on, so I'm not putting any of you on the spot, we're going to do a one-word, what do you see as the future of agriculture? So be thinking of your word while Fred tells us a story.
I don't even know what to say. Usually I have plenty of stories,
I know.
but I'm not.
Well, think back to your presentation this morning. You said you were skipping over so many stories.
Well, Fred continues to think. I'm going to buy you a little time here, Fred. Vanessa, your last question, I just wanted to say, I think we all focused on, in our answers, a lot on production ag, and it just struck me that you don't have to be a farmer or rancher to be in agriculture. Most people are not in production agriculture. Agriculture is food, and food is everywhere in our lives. And so you can be involved in agriculture in so many different ways. So look at the food supply system as a whole, and there is a place for everyone in this room to be involved in agriculture.
Thanks, Danelle. Fred, how are you feeling about your storytelling?
I'm still thinking. I'm not sure what to say.
We don't want to put you on the spot. Okay, how about everybody's one word? Brent, what do you have? Future of agriculture?
Hope.
You.
Empathy.
3 words, life of the planet.
Family.
Necessary.
Fred, they're begging for a story.
I know, and I'm drawn. I did skip over a lot of stories today, but they were all in context of one thing or another, and so now I'm kind of acontextual in terms of what.
That's fair. Okay, well, one more time, help me give the panelists a round of applause.